Hi everyone, and welcome to yet our next topic. So I want to look at the spirit of Elijah. We are giving the very first video is going to introduce Elijah and how he came, why he came, and for what reason. So we want to focus the next weeks or the whole month focusing on the spirit of Elijah as our main Bible topic. So we want to go ahead and before I talk about who exactly Elijah is, I'll also go ahead and explain how Elijah came into the picture, or what led Elijah to come into the picture. Like, what were the moments, what were the seasons, what were the times as to when or why Elijah came into the picture. So we are going to go ahead and first go back a little bit and look at the history of Israel leading to Elijah coming in to bring about to restore the nation, to restore the people of God. And Elijah is that spirit. The spirit of Elijah is God coming himself through Elijah to restore his nation, and this is what we are going to focus in. So first of all, who is Elijah? So the Bible doesn't really talk about who Elijah is. The Bible doesn't give us details about Elijah. It rather gives us more details about the purpose as to why he came. But details like Elijah had maybe parents or his siblings or the schools he went to or what he loved doing, the Bible doesn't give us any of that details. We don't know whether he was married or whether he had children. Rather, the Bible only talks about how he looked like. In the book of 2 Kings 1:7-8 says, he said to them, "What kind of man was he who came to meet you and told you these things?" They answered him, "He wore a garment of hair with a belt of leather about his waist, and he said, 'It is Elijah the Tishbite.'" So that is all we know. We know that Elijah is a Tishbite, nothing more and nothing less. What other thing maybe is that we knew that Elijah was a teacher of the word. He had people he was teaching the word of God. And also, as I introduce Elijah, we shall begin by trying to know, what does Elijah, his name, stand for? So Elijah always, as we put it, Elia, which stands for God, and then Jah, which stands for Jehovah. So we have Elijah. So this is which means God is Jehovah. So the name Elijah means God is Jehovah, and this is Elijah coming into the scene of the nation of Israel at that time. So let's go back a little bit back into the history of Israel. Just as I said, this video is introducing the topic, the spirit of Elijah. So I'm just introducing, and later on we shall focus on Elijah himself. So today we're going to just look at the history that happened. Why did God send Elijah? What was the purpose of Elijah in the nation of Israel? So before the nation of Israel, or before the Israelites left Egypt, they were one. They were united as a nation. Yes, they were not a nation in Israel, in Egypt, but became a nation in the wilderness, because in the wilderness is where we see the sacrificial system began. In the wilderness is where we see the tabernacle built. We just looked at the tabernacle recently. So in the wilderness is where the tabernacle was built, and in the wilderness is where we see that they were under the leadership of God. They had a leader. God gave them through Moses. God was still their leader. So a lot of things were established within in the wilderness. In the wilderness, we see that they were divided into different tribes. So a nation was really built with a system, with a constitutional system, if I can call it that. So we see that in the wilderness, they were a united nation. But then later on, as they demanded for a king and wanted a human leader, not a spiritual God, they wanted a human leader. So God gave them Saul, who's King Saul. So King Saul was their king, but still they were united as a nation. And then later on, we see David becoming their king, and then Solomon, who was David's son, was David's son. So later on, because Solomon intermarried foreign women, these women were from different nations. Others were not believers of God, and others believed in their own gods of their cultures or their own nations. So when Solomon married a lot of these women, God was not happy with him, because he ended up worshiping the gods of his women or of his wives. So in First Kings 11:11 to 12, God told this to Solomon. Therefore the Lord said to Solomon, since this has been your practice, and you have not kept my covenant and my statutes that I have commanded you, I will surely tear the kingdom from you and will give it to your servant. Yet for the sake of David your father, I will not do it in your days, but I will tear it out of the hand of your son. So we see that God promises that he's going to tear down the kingdom of Israel from Solomon, or rather from his child or his son. Why? Because of the abominable thing that he introduced into the tribe or into the nation of Israel. So God is angry at the seed, or at Solomon with his seed. So later on, Solomon gives birth to a son called Rehoboam. And then when Solomon dies, Rehoboam becomes king. And this is where the division of Israel began. Later on, if you continue reading the Bible from the book of Kings through on, you're going to see different kind of, like, it's no longer talking about Israel and Jerusalem like a nation. Now you're hearing Judea as having its own king, Israel having its own king. Like you're reading two different kind of nations, yet it's all Israel. This is because within that time there was division of the nation of Israel. So let's go into this division. So when Rehoboam became king, the people came to him and said, please take away this burden. Like Solomon had caused a lot of burden among the people, among the Israelites. And when the son came into power, the people cried out to the son and said, if your father did this to us, what about you change the system? What about you take away this burden? And then Rehoboam had this to say. Let's read this in 1 Kings 12, 3 to 11. And it reads, and they sent and called him, and Jeroboam and all the assembly of Israel came and said to Rehoboam, your father made our yoke heavy. Now therefore lighten the hard service of your father and his heavy yoke on us, and we will serve you. He said to them, go away for 3 days, then come again to me. So the people went away. Then King Rehoboam took counsel with the old men who had stood before Solomon his father while he was yet alive, saying, how do you advise me to answer these people? And they say to him, if you will be a servant to these people today and serve them and speak good words to them, then you answer them. Then they will be your servants forever. But he abandoned the counsel that the old men gave him and took counsel with the young men who had grown up with him and stood before him. And he said to them, what do you advise that we answer these people who have said to me, lighten the yoke that your father put on us? And they answered, and the young men who had grown up with him said to him, thus shall you speak to these people who said to you, your father made our yoke heavy, but you lighten it for us. Thus shall you speak to these people who say to you, your father made our yoke heavy, but you lighten it for us. Thus shall you say to them, my little finger is thicker than my father's thighs. And now, whereas my father laid on you a heavy yoke, I will add to your yoke. My father disciplined you with whips, but I will discipline you with scorpions. So the result of this Rehoboam refused the advice of the old men, of the wise men who have had experience already into the leadership system, who were the counselors or the ones giving counsel to Solomon. Rehoboam refused to listen to them and instead listened to his age mates, the kids he grew up with. And then later on, the people were angry. The people were not in agreement with what Rehoboam had chosen, the kind of answer he gave them. He wanted to lead them even more harder than how Solomon was doing. So instead, this led to the division of the nation of Israel. So we have then two different nations coming into power, like two different nations being formed because of this response that Rehoboam gave to the nation. So we have the northern part of Israel and the southern part. Now, the northern kingdom is Israel and the southern kingdom is Judea, or Judea. Yeah, it's called Judea. So this is how the nation was divided. At first, it was one whole nation being led by one leader, but because of Rehoboam and because of God's promise to Solomon that I will tear the kingdom from your son's hand. Now we see that Rehoboam here disagrees with the people, and therefore the nation is divided. So we have two kingdoms. We have the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. And the northern kingdom, which is Israel, and then the southern kingdom, which is Judea. So the capital city of Israel, the northern kingdom, is Samaria, and the capital city of the southern kingdom, which is Judea, the capital city is Jerusalem. So now we have two different countries with the same people, but divided because of disagreement, and also because God prophesied it. God put it in law that the nation will no longer be one. So later on, when the invaders or the foreign invaders came to invade the nation of Israel as a whole, we see that the Assyrians came and took the northern part, and then that is Israel, and then we have the Babylonian taking the southern part, and that is Judea. So we see that even during that time, they were all taken captives, both different parts by different foreign nations taking them captive. Just as God said, the nation will be taken away from the son of Solomon and also will be torn apart. After the kingdom was split, we see that that King Rehoboam remained the king of the southern part of Israel. We see that he still remained the king of Jerusalem, and 17 other kings ruled after him up to 2,000 years. 17 other kings followed him. But out of the 17 kings, 9 were very wicked. 9 were worshippers of Baal, worshippers of idols and all that. The others were good, were righteous kings, but 9 of these 17 were very wicked kings. Up to when the foreign countries or the foreign powers came and took them captive. So the northern kingdom had 19 kings who ruled after. After the split, there were over 19 kings who came in and out ruling the nation of Israel. That is now the northern part is the nation of Israel, which capital city is Samaria. Now they were ruled by over 19 kings, but all the 19 kings were wicked. The southern part had at least some good righteous kings that would still go back to God for forgiveness, go back to God seeking his face. But the northern kingdom did not have any righteous king. They were all wicked kings. And the last of them at that point was King Ahab. And that is where Elijah comes into the picture. So Elijah comes in a phase or in a season where now the nation of the southern kingdom of Israel is going to be judged. Like God is coming to judge this nation. They are too wicked that God couldn't contain their wickedness again. So God sends a man called Elijah. That is the season that God comes in, or that Elijah comes in to bring about the word of God, to bring about revival in that part of that in the northern kingdom. And this is where Elijah comes into the picture. And then we all know that that is the time King Ahab was the king. King Ahab was married to a woman, to a lady called Jezebel. Now Jezebel is a Baal worshipper, or she worships idols. Jezebel is a woman who killed all the prophets of God. So that was the season where you couldn't pronounce or mention the name Jehovah. Just by saying Jehovah, you are killed. That was the season that the northern part of Israel was in. It was being ruled by wicked powers. It was being ruled by witchcraft, human sacrifice. It was too much that God couldn't handle, couldn't let it continue. This is where Elijah comes into the picture. And Elijah came to fight Baal, to fight Jezebel. Jezebel is a daughter of a man who is the chief priest of worshipping Baal. Jezebel's father, who lives in Sidon, is called Ethbaal. Now Ethbaal is he's like the leader of those, like, let me say, a priest in the Baal church, in the idol worship kind of church. Like in Sidon, it's the, should I call it that, they are like the originator of the worship of idols. So that is where the environment, or that is where the hometown of Jezebel, she grew up from Sidon, with her father called Ethbaal, or Athbel, depending on how you pronounce him. So this is how Elijah comes into the picture. Elijah comes into the picture where the northern part of Israel, where the northern part, that is Israel, is being ruled, or is in darkness. This is a season where many people couldn't pronounce the name Jehovah. This was a season where every prophet of God was being murdered. This is a season whereby human sacrifice was becoming the norm of the day. This was the season where there was nothing, or sacrifices, or the sacrifices of God were now being given to Baal, or were being given to the idol worshippers. So this is the time that God sent a man called Elijah. And that is now, that is just for the beginning, that is for today. And next time we shall dig in to know how, or what God exactly did through Elijah, and then how this is showed in our lives as well today. Thank you for watching.